Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Chandler Swanson, and today we are going to be discussing sleep disorders within military personnel. So before we get into the contents of what my presentation is going to be, we're going to do a brief overview of what sleep disorders look like and then the correlation with them within military personnel. I'm also going to give you a quick overview about what we're going to be discussing, and then we'll go into the content. So to start off, just a little overview about what we're going to be talking about. Again, we're going to be talking about sleep disorders within military personnel. We're going to be looking at the specific characteristics such as active duty, non-active duty, veteran status, combat zones. We're going to be looking at the demographics and the challenges that accompany um, the experiences that individuals have while they're in the military. We're also going to be learning about the impact on not only the individual, but the family. We're also going to be looking at services that individuals that are struggling with sleep disorders can go through, and we're also going to be looking at the role of a social worker within sleep disorders and military personnel. So, moving forward from here, we are going to go into, oops, if my screen wants to work. Oh, okay. So, starting off for a little introduction, as I talked about, we're going to be talking a little bit about the background about sleep disorders for the first little bit of the presentation. So, sleep disorders in the United States are very common. Whether an individual has a traumatic event that they experienced, a loss of a loved one, many experiences can contribute to why a regular civilian would have a sleep disorder. When we're looking at sleep disorders within military personnel, these reasonings and background are going to be extremely different than a regular civilian. Individuals are either in experiencing or have experienced active combat. They're in these intense settings constantly. They're away from home, away from family. There's a lot of things that can play into the reasoning behind sleep disorders within the military population. Going off of that, also extreme circumstances and lifestyle differences. Us as civilians, we do not go into combat. We do not actively seek out combat either. But these are things that military personnel experience and that can strongly contribute to their chances of developing a sleep disorder. So, keeping all of this in mind, we're going to move on to talk about some of the significant characteristics that make up and can contribute to sleep disorders. All right. So the first thing that we're going to really be talking about in the characteristic sections of sleep disorders, oh my goodness, excuse me, is going to be the acknowledgement and the linkage between sleep disorders and mental illnesses within military personnel. So some of the characteristics aside from this that could contribute to developing a sleep disorder are active duty, returning to civilian life, and a combination of mental health issues and physical health issues. So these are just some examples, but these are examples of some of the characteristics that can contribute to sleep disorders. When discussing the combination, this part that I discussed about the combination of mental health issues and physical health issues, this is extremely imperative to notice and acknowledge when looking at sleep disorders within military personnel. So the statistic that I have listed is just a little bit of an overview and just to get you acquainted with what I'm going to try and relay to you, but 58.1% of military personnel undergoing a sleep study have one or more medical comorbidities, and those diagnosed with insomnia are 2 times more likely to have PTSD and 1.5 times more likely to have pain. So, going off of what this study kind of presented to us, is that through my research, I found that most often, more times than not, if an individual is diagnosed with a sleep disorder, that there is also other mental health and physical health issues that are accompanying it, or they're diagnosed with a mental health illness or have a physical illness that affects their daily life, and the sleep disorder is accompanying that. I just wanted to point that out because I think that is extremely important for us as social workers and people that are going to be in the positions of providing care and treatment to individuals with military background, that this is acknowledged and kind of sought and seeks through in treatment. And also to back up a little bit of the claims that I am making, I am going to present a empirical study that I relied on through my research and kind of integrated heavily within my paper. So within this empirical study. It really aimed to prove, as I was explaining to you, the linkage between different disorders and sleep disorders. In this empirical study specifically, they focused on PTSD, nightmares, and physical health disorders, and the prevalence that sleep disorders played within these three mental health issues. So they did a small study of only 93 veterans, but one of the reasons why this was a small study was because the criteria was a little bit specific. So they had to have three separate mental health disorders that were not sleep disorders, because remember, as I stated, the purpose of this study was to explain the prevalence of sleep disorders and other mental health issues. So this study directly addresses the importance of paying attention to all symptoms and not only addressing one issue at a time. So if you're only addressing one issue and then you're just saying bye at the end of the treatment, there's a lot of things that you're going to be missing. And especially within military personnel, and given the statistics and the things that I had stated already, there's a more chance that there is going to be another mental health issue that is either before the sleep disorder or that is diagnosed along with the sleep disorder. And again, this is imperative for us as social workers to be competent and acknowledge, because it will be extremely difficult to have any sort of progress if they are not all being acknowledged. All right, so moving forward, another unique characteristic that we are going, or significant characteristic that we're going to be talking about with military personnel, is active duty. Just the physical act of being in active duty. Individuals are in intense, high anxiety environments, and there is no way to ever get normal sleep at night, just for the fact that they are away from home, not near anyone, that they are their family or their loved ones, and then add on that to the top of their duties and their requirements while they're on active duty, frequent moves and stress. And then with all of that being said, even if they're not in active duty and they do get one good night of sleep, maybe they have off from that shift and or they didn't have any responsibilities for that day, those experiences and the things that they had just experienced 24 hours prior are not going to leave their brain and allow them to have a solid REM sleep at night. That's just not going to happen. So while they're on active duty, that also creates another set of unique circumstances that it's also very difficult to implement a treatment plan while individuals are on active duty, because there's just really no way of staying on a consistent schedule. And below, I have listed a statistic for you that just basically explains that the people that were participated in this study reported that their sleep quality was significantly worse in the deployed setting, which is kind of what I discussed, given the stress, the intensity of the environments, and even if they did have a chance to sleep, again, these experiences are not just going to go away when they shut their head because they're supposed to be sleeping. So all of these things, keeping in mind, are very strong characteristics that can contribute to an individual developing a sleep disorder while they are in the military. Moving forward from here, we are going to touch on the demographics that surround sleep disorders in the military. When looking at demographics, truly from the highest ranking officer to the lowest ranking officer, from the top branch to the lowest branch, and all the branches in between, sleep disorders are prevalent. There are sleep disorders within every single branch. Every single officer is subject to experiencing a sleep disorder. With that being said, though, it is important to keep in mind the vast majority of individuals in the military are men. So while we're looking at a lot of these statistics and a lot of these statements, they are directed towards men. But something to be said about that is that women, while they are in the military, are also experiencing all of the things that the men are experiencing and being reported in studies. And on top of that, also experiencing different things than the civilians and their male counterparts are not going to be facing. Men do not have childbirth, they do not give birth to children. So some of these play into the effects of having sleep disorder. As stated, women who are pregnant or have young children have the shortest sleep duration, ranging from 5.45 to 5.8.4, 5.84 hours per night. With this being said, it is extremely important to note that based on some of the experiences that are going to be different for women and for men, such as leaving behind children that you had just birthed, or being a single mother and leaving behind your children, these adverse experiences are going to play into the prevalence of sleep disorders within women in the military. And again, integrating into the military is a complete lifestyle change and a complete adjustment. And then add on to the fact that you're also leaving behind your children, in terms of trying to give them a better life. And this stress also plays into factors of developing sleep disorders. Continuing with demographics, every branch of the military, apart from the Marine Corps, had a higher representation of racial minorities than the US population. And there was a higher prevalence of self-reported sleep complaints among Blacks and Hispanics compared to white veterans and active duty personnel. So this is important to note in the demographics section, as the majority of the individuals that are in the military, aside from the Marine Corps, are a minority. So they are going to be represented at a higher rate than white veterans and other people that were used in this study. So that is extremely important to note as social workers and service providers, that we should also be paying attention to the different cultural background and ethnic background that can play into them experiencing sleep disorders in different ways, and gaining and getting sleep disorders from these experiences in a different way based on their cultural background and their ethnic background. Another thing to note while we are looking at the demographics is to look at veterans. It was found that sleep apnea and insomnia were the most common diagnoses among veterans with any sleep disorder. So veterans are being diagnosed with sleep disorders. This is still after they have finished their tenure in the military and out of veteran status, no chance for active duty. These symptoms, stress, and experiences that they have experienced are still with them. And with all this being said, the prevalence of sleep disorders, contributing factors, symptoms, and everything else could be vary depending on what demographic within the military that you are working with. So it is very imperative to be competent in all of the demographics and all the factors such as cultural backgrounds and ethnic backgrounds, as there is a high representation of minorities within the military. All right, so moving along from the demographics, we are going to be discussing the unique challenges. So within unique challenges, one of the challenges that individuals face is being deployed. As I touched on a little bit earlier, being deployed makes it almost impossible to create any form of treatment plan. I'm not even sure that you would be able to do that. But that also plays into the effect that you cannot maintain a healthy sleeping pattern while you are deployed, even if you tried very hard. So frequent awakenings during the nighttime, the high tense environments, prior mental illnesses, and many other factors contribute to the complexity of sleep services while you're in a deployed setting and while you're in the military. So a little statistic is that insufficient sleep and resulting fatigue compromises personal safety, mission, success, and even national security. So with this being said, that many of these disturbances turn into chronic conditions, which we are seeing more and more frequently due to the fact that it is extremely difficult to create treatment plans during the time of when sleep disorders are most likely developing, which is in the deployed setting. Another unique challenge is night shift, and the US's military and pride in owning the night. So touching on night shift, when compared to someone who is in the military, comparing them to a civilian, we normally do not have to work night shift. And even if we are working night shift, we aren't going to have to do the things that individuals who are in the military working in night shift are doing. Round the clock schedules, drop of the hat change, combat, being in combat zone, and many other circumstances can contribute to not only developing a sleep disorder from being on night shift, but the stress and all of these things can also lead into developing a sleep disorder at a higher rate due to being on night shift. Another thing that contributes to sleep disorders and the prevalence within the military is our pride in owning the night. Owning the night essentially means that high-risk operations against enemy forces are prioritized instead at night instead of during the day. And as civilians, and we are extremely appreciative and thankful that these missions are executed safely. However, we are oftentimes unaware that the implications following can be chronic and detrimental to one's physical and mental health due to the immense training and time that it takes to be prepared for one of these special missions that contribute to sleep disorders. Moving forward from here, the impact of the issue. Sleep disorders can create extreme stress and unusual circumstances for not only the individual, but for also the family unit. While they're being deployed, that can create immense stress. If they are injured, that creates immense stress. There was an interesting statistic from the Department of Defense that there are more family members, 54.5%, than military personnel, 45.5%. This statistic, I think, just speaks volume towards the fact that not only are the effects of the military present upon the individual, however, they are going to bleed and fall onto the family. So the overall impact of poor negative health aspects of sleep disorders will pour onto individual family members. As we talked about a little bit earlier, there is more than not likely going to be another mental health issue that is accompanying sleep disorders. So if these are both not treated, they can also affect the family in negative ways. And also bouncing off a little bit of how this can affect individual, there was an interesting statistic that I found that 24 hours sleep deprivation rapidly increased gold standard signatures of brain inflammation and risk for Alzheimer's disease. So again, this also can affect the family unit as Alzheimer's is a very debilitating disease that individuals have to deal with, that oftentimes the responsibility falls back on the family to care for that individual. All right, so moving forward from here, we're going to be talking a little bit about the services and treatment that can be put into place and practice for sleep disorders within the military. So one of the main things that I kind of found throughout the research was that you need to be proactive versus reactive. A lot of the research suggested that we could align sleep schedules with regular natural sleep habits of civilian peers and then conduct military training. So this would obviously be at the beginning of one's military career, because as we stated, it is almost impossible to guarantee a consistent sleep schedule while an individual is on active duty. So while an individual is training in basic training, if you can implement ideas and just put the thought in their head that a solid sleep schedule is important and try and align these sleep schedules with one of those that's not that much different, so it's a gradual change, could be extremely beneficial. It was shown that reductions in mood disturbances, improvements in marksmanship, and less fatigue, as well as overall improvements in scores of sleep quality, highlighting the significant impact of natural sleep drive on human performance. So with this statistic, it is clear that if we were to implement these different changes of sleep within one's military experience, there could be a positive effect coming out of active duty because they have these guidelines and services already set in place because they were exposed to them during basic training. Excuse me. Again, kind of following off of the last thing that I had said, this is a time when most trainees' sleep patterns are still developing during basic training, and this could carry forward to increase resiliency against future circadian sleep disruptions or mental illness. Again, bouncing off the being proactive versus reactive, it's really naive to think that we can try and create treatment plans that are going to be followed through while an individual is on active duty. So if we can do what we can to create and implement services and kind of a plan prior to when they go into active duty and they have more of a regular civilian schedule, we can really be effective in being proactive against sleep disorders. All right, so we're also going to be touching on the role and impact of social workers. Again, it is imperative that all factors of one's military tenure are considered. This includes age, gender, ethnicity, race, active duty, Were they combat? Were they not? How often did they work night shift? What was their deployment? What did their deployment look like? Did they lose anyone while they were overseas? Did they have family that was still at home? Based on the extremely diverse amount of factors that can contribute to someone in the military developing a sleep disorder, it is imperative and it increases the need for social workers to be part of these treatment aspects. 9 times out of 10, we are going to be dealing with clients that have different backgrounds, accumulative of different things that happen to them in their lifetime, and we are prepared to take on and listen and make people feel heard. With this being said, we also are in the position to empower and provide education. We are able to educate and let our client, in this case that we're discussing, someone that has military background, be empowered. They know what is going on. They know their diagnostics. And with this, we can empower them to continue to move forward. And then this gives them some form of control back. So we must continue to advance all of our competencies in these areas to be able to have meaningful and effective conversations with military personnel. Another thing is that I think we should all just listen. In a lot of the research that I was doing, a lot of military personnel just want to be heard. And that is also extremely empowering because they do not feel judged while you are just listening. They're not judging them for the things that they went through or maybe the things that they had to do while they were over there. All right, so before we conclude, we are going to be looking at a video from a veteran Navy SEAL who discusses some sleep. But before we do this, we're going to read this quote from Major Aubrey Green, and she kind of discusses and gives a little bit of an insight to what her experience was like within sleep and while she was in the military. In peace and war, the lack of sleep works like termites in a house, below the surface, gnawing quietly and unseen to produce gradual weakening, which can lead to a sudden and unexpected collapse. And I think this quote was just extremely important to put in here because when I read this, I put this quote into my paper. I was extremely moved by this quote because it really just truly encapsulates what sleep disorders could be like for someone that is in the military and the effects of if they are not receiving proper treatment and proper care once they have left the military. So bouncing back to our podcast video, it's only a little bit, so we're gonna just watch that quick. Okay. So yes, so with all that being said and watching those videos, it is extremely imperative that we are involving ourselves in as social workers and as humans in discussing these things with veterans. Sorry, my brain just got a little discombobulated because my screen did not. Sorry. Okay, perfect. All right, so now I got that screen back up. Sorry about that. Yeah, so based off what the Navy SEAL had said and some of the other things that we had touched on with the quote, is extremely imperative that we continue our research and continue paying attention to individuals that are in the military, as a lot of them are struggling with sleep disorders, and it is a lot bigger than just sleep. It's bigger than just sleep. All right. So to wrap things up, just a few couple last points. that the military must recognize that sleep and sound REM sleep have to become a priority. Good patterns take attention to detail, effort, order, and accountability, which are all traits and areas that higher ranked officers can truly emphasize and integrate, bring importance to, bring awareness to. That sleep is important. It is important to have a good sleep pattern, and it is also imperative for the military to try different approaches and different avenues for creating better sleep patterns and resiliency towards sleep disorders for the individuals who are in the military. Again, social workers also, their skill sets can be heavily utilized in treatment approaches and during discussions with veterans, and we must continue to advance our competencies so we are not only being the best care providers and service providers that we can be for ourselves, but also for our clients. So, all right, thank you so much. That's everything. And I hope you can take away some important information to help better serve the military population. Thank you so much.